You're not losing your mind. Your psyche is drowning. There's a moment that happens without warning. You're going through your day, managing everything, holding it together, and then something small happens. A question, a sound, a minor inconvenience, and you snap. Not proportionally, not rationally. You feel rage surge through you over something that shouldn't matter, or you shut down completely, unable to respond at all. Or you feel like you're watching yourself from the outside, detached and numb, and you have no idea where it came from. This isn't a character flaw. This isn't weakness. This is overstimulation, and it's your psyche's way of telling you that you've exceeded your internal capacity. Jung understood this as psychic overload, the moment when the conscious mind can no longer process the amount of input it's receiving. When the ego's organizing function breaks down under the weight of too much stimulation, too much information, too many demands, when this happens, you lose your center, you fragment, and the fragmentation manifests as symptoms that feel like they're coming from nowhere. Anxiety, irritability, emotional volatility, dissociation, the sudden inability to handle things that normally wouldn't bother you. These aren't separate issues. They're all expressions of the same underlying reality. Your inner world is overstimulated, and it's trying to force you to stop. The psyche has limits. It can only process so much before it starts breaking down, but modern life is designed to ignore those limits, to push past them, to demand constant availability, constant productivity, constant engagement. You're expected to be accessible at all times, to respond immediately, to manage multiple streams of information simultaneously, to stay informed, stay connected, stay on top of everything. And your nervous system was never built for this. It was built for long stretches of quiet, for slow, deliberate engagement with the immediate environment, for deep focus on singular tasks, for regular periods of rest and integration. But you don't get that anymore. You get notifications, demands, an endless stream of input that never stops, and your psyche is drowning in it. Overstimulation doesn't announce itself clearly. It doesn't say, "You've reached your limit, please stop." It shows up as irritability, as the feeling that everything is too much, as the inability to focus, as emotional reactions that don't match the situation. You're not overreacting, you're overwhelmed, and your psyche is signaling that it can no longer maintain coherence. Jung talked about the importance of psychological containment, the ego's ability to hold and process experience. But that ability depends on space, on the capacity to integrate what's happening before new input arrives. When that space disappears, when you're constantly being pulled in different directions, the ego can't do its job. It can't organize experience. It can't make sense of what's happening. It just reacts. And the reactions aren't pretty. This is what makes overstimulation so dangerous. It doesn't just make you uncomfortable, it destabilizes your sense of self. You stop feeling like yourself. You stop recognizing your own responses. You become reactive, fragmented, unable to access the parts of yourself that usually keep you grounded. And the people around you notice. But they don't understand. They see irritability, withdrawal, emotional unpredictability. They think you're being difficult or distant or unreasonable, but what's actually happening is internal collapse. Your psyche is trying to protect itself by shutting down non-essential functions, by withdrawing energy, by creating distance between you and the overwhelming input. It's not personal, it's survival. Let's make this concrete. Because overstimulation doesn't happen in abstract psychological theory. It happens in your actual life, in moments that feel out of control and impossible to explain. You've been managing everything, work, relationships, responsibilities. You're handling it, or at least you think you are. You're checking boxes, meeting deadlines, showing up. But underneath the surface, something is building. A pressure, a sense of being stretched too thin. You don't acknowledge it because there's no time to acknowledge it. You just keep moving. And then one evening, you come home. Your partner asks you a simple question, something innocuous. How was your day? Or did you remember to pick up the groceries? And something in you breaks. You snap at them hard, disproportionately. You feel rage flood through you, and even as it's happening, part of you is watching in disbelief. Why are you reacting like this? Why does such a small question feel unbearable? Your partner is confused, hurt. They didn't do anything wrong, and you know that. But you can't explain what's happening. You can't articulate that it's not about the question. It's about the fact that you've been answering questions all day, that your psyche has been processing demands nonstop, that this one additional input, no matter how small, was the one that pushed you over the edge. You're not angry at them. You're drowning, and they were just the last thing your psyche encountered before it gave out. Or maybe it doesn't come out as anger. Maybe it comes out as shutdown. They ask you something, and you just stare at them. Your mind goes blank. You can't think. You can't respond. You feel like you're underwater, watching them through glass. This is dissociation, the psyche's emergency response when it can't handle any more input. It separates consciousness from immediate experience. It creates distance. It protects you from having to process what you can no longer process. But to the other person, you just seem checked out, absent, like you don't care. And you do care. But in that moment, caring requires more capacity than you have. This is what overstimulation does. It doesn't just make you tired. It fragments your ability to show up as yourself. It makes you reactive, volatile, or numb. It turns you into someone you don't recognize. And the worst part is you can't explain it. You can't point to one thing and say, this is what's wrong, because it's not one thing. It's the accumulation of everything, the endless demands, the constant availability, the lack of space to process anything before the next thing arrives. Your psyche is trying to tell you something, and the message is simple. Stop. But you can't stop, or you don't think you can, because stopping feels like failing, like letting people down, like admitting you can't handle what everyone else seems to manage just fine. So you push through, and the overstimulation gets worse. You start noticing it in other ways. You can't focus anymore. You read the same sentence 5 times and still don't absorb it. You sit down to work, and your mind won't settle. It jumps from thing to thing, never landing anywhere. You feel irritable all the time. Small sounds grate on you. Someone chewing, a dog barking, traffic noise. Things that never bothered you before now feel physically painful. Your sleep deteriorates. You lie awake with your mind racing, replaying conversations, running through tomorrow's tasks, unable to turn off. Or you fall asleep immediately because you're exhausted. But you wake up unrested, like your mind never actually stopped working. You start withdrawing from people, not because you don't care about them, but because being around anyone requires energy you don't have. Every interaction feels like work. Every conversation demands something from you, and you feel guilty about it. You tell yourself you're being antisocial, that you should be more present, that everyone else manages to maintain relationships while being busy, so why can't you? But this isn't about capability. This is about capacity, and you've exceeded yours. Jung understood that the psyche needs periods of withdrawal to maintain health. That consciousness requires unconsciousness. That activity requires rest. That external engagement requires internal silence. But modern life doesn't honor that rhythm. It demands constant external engagement, constant availability, constant stimulation. And when you don't create space for internal stillness, your psyche creates it for you through shutdown, through fragmentation, through symptoms that force you to stop. This is the moment most people resist. The moment when their body and mind are clearly signaling that something needs to change. But instead of listening, they try to manage the symptoms. They take something for the anxiety. They push through the exhaustion. They apologize for snapping, but don't change the underlying conditions that caused it. And the cycle continues until the psyche escalates, until the symptoms become impossible to ignore. This is the shift. The moment you stop treating overstimulation as something to overcome and start seeing it as information. Your psyche isn't betraying you. It's trying to save you from a pace you can't sustain, from demands that exceed your capacity, from a life that's slowly eroding your ability to be present to yourself. Overstimulation is fragmentation. It's what happens when the organizing center of consciousness can't hold everything anymore. When the ego loses its ability to integrate experience because there's too much experience coming in too fast. And the solution isn't better time management or more productivity hacks. The solution is returning to internal stillness. This sounds simple, but for most people, it's nearly impossible. Because stillness requires saying no. It requires disappointing people. It requires prioritizing your internal state over external demands. It requires admitting that you can't do everything, that you need space, that you need silence, that you need time where nothing is being asked of you. And that feels selfish, lazy, like giving up. But it's not. It's reclaiming your center. It's preventing the complete psychological collapse that's coming if you don't stop. You start by recognizing the signs, learning what overstimulation feels like in your body before it reaches the breaking point. Maybe it's tension in your chest, a tightness in your jaw, a feeling of being scattered like your thoughts won't land anywhere, a sudden urge to escape whatever situation you're in. These are early warnings, your psyche telling you that you're approaching your limit, and instead of pushing through, you pause, you create space, even if it's just 5 minutes. You step away, you close your eyes, you breathe, you let your nervous system settle before you continue. This isn't indulgence. This is maintenance. This is what allows you to show up as yourself instead of as a fragmented, reactive version of yourself. You also start setting boundaries around input. You turn off notifications. You stop checking your phone every few minutes. You stop consuming news constantly. You stop making yourself available to everyone all the time. You create periods in your day where nothing is being asked of you, where you're not processing information, where you're not performing, where you're just present with yourself. This feels uncomfortable at first because you're so used to constant stimulation that stillness feels wrong, like you should be doing something, like you're wasting time. But you're not wasting time. You're allowing your psyche to integrate, to process what you've experienced, to reorganize itself around a center instead of fragmenting outward in all directions. And slowly, something shifts. The irritability lessens, the anxiety quiets, the dissociation decreases. You start feeling like yourself again, not because you've fixed anything externally, but because you've stopped drowning your psyche in input it can't process. Jung believed that the psyche has a natural drive toward wholeness. But wholeness requires integration, and integration requires time, space, silence. When you don't give your psyche those things, it fragments. It splits into reactive parts that don't communicate with each other, parts that snap at loved ones, parts that shut down, parts that feel nothing, parts that feel everything, and you stop experiencing yourself as a coherent whole. You become a collection of reactions, of symptoms, of survival mechanisms. But when you return to stillness, when you create space for your psyche to reorganize itself, the fragments begin to integrate. The parts that split off in response to overstimulation start coming back online. You feel present again, grounded, like you're inhabiting your own life instead of just reacting to it. This doesn't mean you eliminate all stress or stimulation. That's not realistic, but it means you respect your limits. You recognize when you're approaching capacity, and you adjust accordingly. You stop saying yes to everything. You stop forcing yourself to be available constantly. You stop pretending you can handle more than you actually can. You start prioritizing your internal state, not as a luxury, but as a necessity, as the foundation that allows you to show up for anything else. And your relationships change because you're not snapping at people anymore. You're not shutting down. You're not checked out or numb. You're present, responsive, yourself. Not because you've become more capable, but because you've stopped exceeding your capacity. The people who care about you will understand. And the people who don't, who demand your constant availability despite what it costs you, aren't people you need to keep accommodating. Your psyche is not expendable. Your inner world is not something to sacrifice for external productivity or social performance. When it becomes overstimulated, when it starts fragmenting, it's not